Welcome to the Value Investor TV podcast. It's the podcast that helps you grow your wealth and become financially independent. My name is Becco and my partner, Hari. Welcome back. This is podcast 39. We're going to be talking about, as you saw in the title, Nvidia. This has been on the news for quite some time now. It's been making splashes. So we'll talk about it in this episode and the next episode. But first, disclaimer, Hari.
Yeah, so as we say with every talk that we do here, we are a, this is a podcast for your entertainment purposes. We are not your financial advisor. We do not have any sort of knowledge of what your personal financial situation is. You have to make these decisions for yourself. What we are trying to do here is to teach you how to evaluate businesses. We may make mistakes. You have to make these decisions for yourself. So,
yeah, important point right there. So let's get on with the podcast. Again, like I said, we're going to do Nvidia. It's an exciting company, and it's very, very. Well, we'll talk about more in detail. But first, I want to give a few shout outs to people who have reached out for the checklist. As I said in earlier podcast, checklist, it's important to have it in front of you because that's what we use to analyze companies. So a few shout outs to people who've reached out. So should I name names?
We'll keep it private.
We'll keep it private. Well, thank you guys for reaching out. We've gotten a lot of requests from overseas, surprisingly. Mainland U.S. a few. Hawaii, I know you guys are listening out there. And then we have a few requests from overseas in South America and Europe. So thank you guys all for listening. Okay, let's get on with Nvidia.
Oh, and also if you want to get the checklist, you can send us an email at info@valueinvestor.org.
Absolutely.
Or if you want to leave feedback, hate mail, whatever your thing, just drop us a line.
Yep, exactly. Awesome. Let's get on with the checklist and the podcast. So Nvidia, what do they do? So Nvidia, if you look at their logo, I think it's pretty interesting. The logo is an eye. Think about that. It's an eye. It's a green eye, guys. And what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, that means, I didn't know this, but Nvidia's logo is an eye, and what they do is their primary business is making GPU. It stands for Graphic Processing Unit. You want to elaborate on more about what that is, just on a technical realm for the layman?
I mean, if you're if you're not familiar with what a graphics processing unit, which they claim they invented, which is probably true actually, because prior to that, all of the graphics in your, the display that you would see on your screen has to go through some calculations to know what to show on the monitor, and that was very simple before. It was just memory of what color should be displayed.
Yep.
But what Nvidia had done, and there were other companies that existed around the time Nvidia was born, was make the ability to take 3D graphics and render them in real time.
Yep.
So this is something that, 3D graphics really started in the late 70s, but it was, machines, hundreds of machines. So if you actually watch the original Tron movie, it had, some of the earliest 3D graphics that were ever produced in a movie. And this took, months to render these images and so forth. So now Nvidia is able to do, after 25 years of existence, 26, I guess will be this year, they're actually able to do real-time reflections and, all of these amazing things so they're basically powering the game industry, with all of their, the graphics that they do.
Yeah, it's really incredible. If you crack open 10K, their 10K, they will show you in the first 5 pages or something like that their rendering of all these animation. It's absolutely fantastic. I mean, you look at it and you realize, like, man, like this is so real. Like this is so real. So GPU, that's what they make. Graphic processing unit. These are chips that goes into computers and things like that.
Well, and also to to add to that, excuse me, getting over a cold. Sorry. The GPU is also basically a really fast, parallelized task, processor. So just like the CPU, but what the GPU lacks is it doesn't have direct access to the system memory. So it takes time to load up assets into the GPU's memory.
Yep.
And then the other thing that is, but what it can do is it can do thousands and thousands of calculations in parallel per second.
Yep.
And so why that's useful is that's essentially what powers artificial intelligence, is being able to do thousands and thousands and thousands of parallel calculations simultaneously.
Yeah, like Hari said, it was originally created to render images, animations, and videos, but increasingly it's being used to handle general computing tasks. And its product line, so Nvidia, let's go into kind of a more granular level of what types of GPUs they make. They make a whole different categories of GPUs, but they're mostly for following categories: for PC gaming, cloud computing, obviously for designing professionals, making computer-aided designs, video editing, things like that, and like Hari said, AI for general purpose computing AI, and then also a big part of their push is to install GPUs in data centers, the cloud. And then most recently, cryptocurrency mining, because it has so much computational power right there. So GPU is really the core of Nvidia, but also they have another line of business. They call themselves SoC, System on Chip. It's a type of integrated circuit with GPU, CPU, and other components such as memory on a single chip. So
that. The best example of that is actually the Nintendo Switch. It uses the Nvidia Tegra X1, I think it is.
Yep.
And it is a it's an entire system, that can run an entire operating system and everything, but it all exists on one single board.
Yeah. So that's another type of business that they do. So
that same system on a chip is actually what is in your in Tesla.
Yeah.
The car, not Nvidia's Tesla chip, but which is also also in that chip. But in the Tesla cars,
car,
and they're making a lot of inroads into the car market as well.
Exactly. So again, GPU, I told you about all the product lines that they have for GPU, and then a system on chip. On the product line for that is, like Hari said, software, automotive software market, self-driving cars. They're coming online now, so a lot of those are powered by SoCs. And also they have a lot of mobile, home entertainment stuff, AI, gaming, things like that. So embedded systems, SoC is used for those. So largely speaking, two product lines, GPU and SoC, system on chip.
I think also one thing that was interesting to me when reading through the annual report, because I think a lot of people don't really appreciate the gaming market. So the gaming market is actually the largest entertainment market in the world, right? As a whole, it's $100 billion a year business, and Nvidia doesn't make video games, but they are the ones that power the video game. So without, you can certainly make graphics, processing units without it, but Nvidia is the largest player in that market. And if you especially want to play the high end stuff, you only have two choices, which is ATI, or as the CEO refers to it, the other company in the conference calls. But it's a very interesting dynamic, because if you're not into games, it's like a hidden market.
It's totally hidden.
And you now are seeing esports. The esports market is blowing up. You're seeing people playing video games, in especially Southeast Asia, China. It's an enormous industry. So, NVIDIA's scope, even though it seems like, well, it's just gaming, which is what they started out as, and it's still the majority of their revenue, it's an enormous industry.
Yeah.
And, they work very closely with the developers to, enhance, their products and stuff like that.
Yeah. Absolutely. I want to touch on this really quick. Like I said earlier, two different types of businesses, GPU and SoC. I just wanted to give people some reference as to how much business they're doing. So GPU last year, GPU segment right there, GPU did $8.1 billion of sales. And the other SoC, Tegra processor, which is system on chip, they did $1.5 billion in sales. I just want to give you guys the context as we discuss this company further in detail. So let's move on to I want to touch on the most recent performance. Just kind of touch kind of high on the higher end of things. So their gross profit is about 41%. The cost of goods sold. It's quite a bit. A lot goes into making these chips. So one thing that I want to kind of touch on here is recognition of cost of goods sold, because we're going to go into this a little bit further, but Nvidia does fabless manufacturing, which is they outsource basically the entire manufacturing process. Only thing they do in-house is design the chips. So once you design the chips, they just outsource the entire manufacturing process. So in terms of cost of goods sold and recognizing cost of goods sold, it's mostly it's all the manufacturing cost that goes into it. So all the manufacturing costs, development costs for licenses and service agreements, as well as a stock-based compensation to personnel associated with manufacturing. So all of those are associated in cost of goods sold. It's a little bit different than other businesses where you have manufacturing in-house. So I just wanted to point that out. When you guys are reading through the annual report and financial statements, keep that in mind. Awesome. Should we move on to the next question, Hari?
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about their competitive advantage and how, the other term for that is the moat.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us what you think their competitive advantage is, and then I'll give my thoughts also.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm shuffling through my notes here. Okay. I think this is obviously Nvidia is a engineering company, right? They manufacture. Oh, sorry, I'm out of focus here. Nvidia is it's an engineering powerhouse. They make chips that power many, many different industries, and industries that are going to be big in the future, such as AI and data centers. Data centers you see in their income statement, it's just blowing up, and cryptocurrency. And so I think really their key edge is that technical edge, that the ability to develop constantly, bring out new products that people like. So we have a list of competitive advantage, the moats, types of moats on our checklist: brand, networking effects, switching costs, low cost, intangible assets. I don't know where to exactly pinpoint this one.
Well, I think there's certainly a brand moat here, right? Yep. That when you're building speaking from a personal experience, you're building a gaming rig, you kind of have two choices, ATI and Nvidia.
Yeah.
And, they're constantly in a slugfest, but, Nvidia seems to always have an edge, there. And then, recently the Vega line came out and it was a little bit, it was very competitive with the 1080 series. And then you went and got a new Nvidia, with the real-time ray tracing, which, to me is like mind-blowing, right? Like this is something that
ray tracing.
When I used to do computer graphics, or still do, and ray tracing was always the thing that was super expensive, right? It took forever, and now they're doing it in real time. Which, if you haven't seen this, there's a video of they rendered a scene in Star Wars in real time, where Captain Phasma is coming in an elevator And if you search for it, real-time ray tracing Star Wars, you'll find it on YouTube, and it's worth watching. But if someone hadn't told me that was, rendered, I would have completely thought that was just a regular thing they've filmed in a traditional way.
Yeah.
So, what I would say is that there's certainly a brand component to what they're doing. They have a strong technical edge.
Yeah.
And then there is actually some switching costs there, that when you are building for the data center AI market, they have an API called so an application programming interface. For the non-technical folks, they're called CUDA, which is their computing system that how you speak to the GPU.
Yep.
And the CUDA API has been around for 12 years. And a lot of people have built their AI stuff around the CUDA process.
Yeah.
So if you're not familiar with software development, if you attach yourself to a particular library and then a new library comes along, you have to change not just the calls that you make to that, but it actually changes the entire architecture in some cases of how you execute your application. So it's a fairly significant thing to replace CUDA with OpenCL, which is the open standard that exists. So I would say that there's certainly a lot of moats here, but I mean, to me, the technical moat here is what I think. If you gave Becco and me $100 billion and asked us to go compete with Nvidia, could we beat them? And I think the answer is, well, it would take us 25 years, because that's how long they've been around.
They've been around since, again, I wanted to mention this. They've been around since 1993, and they IPO'd in 1999. This is the height of the tech bubble, and then they existed. I mean, they were one of the few companies that existed out of the bubble there. But, from market capitalization of about 200 million to, right now they're at about 90 billion. So about 400x from IPO. That's incredible success right there.
Yeah.
I want to give a quick shout out to our kind of plug into our website, thevalueinvestor.org. If you go to that website and type in the ticker NVDA, ticker for Nvidia, you will be able to see all the financial statements, all three financial statements cleanly laid out from going all the way back to 1995. So do check that out. Again, let's go back to the moat discussion. What I found interesting, like you said, the technical edge for Nvidia is powerful. It's really powerful, really powerful. And I wanted to look at the R&D expenses. R&D expenses divided by the revenue. So percentage of revenue coming in, and how much of that revenue generated goes into R&D. I wanted to look at that. I wanted to compare it to AMD. They're spending on average. This is averaging out from 2012. They're averaging about a quarter. So what comes in, a quarter of that money, about 25%, goes out on R&D expense. So I mean that's pretty sizable. Again, like we said, they're bringing in about 10 million or 10 billion rather, 8 point something, and then it's sizable amount of money going into R&D.
Yeah, and so that means it's going. That's what they're just spending every year.
Yeah,
and then there's a legacy of the knowledge and know-how that they have built up over that 25-year period that is also into that. So yeah. I mean that's a hard thing to overcome. If you're trying to compete with those guys.
Yeah. I also want to say we have the technical edge. Obviously, that's very, very important. But also, the manufacturing edge is also something that we can't overlook, I don't think. Because making a chip, I think the most recent tariff talk between China and U.S. kind of surfaced the idea that manufacturing these complex parts, iPhone, for example, is a very, very complex thing. You have all these supplies. You have to chain all them together. Yeah. And manufacturing is done all in Asia. And you have all these different companies that has to come together to make a single product. Nvidia is not an exception in this case.
Yeah, I mean, you're the cat herder in this scenario, right? Yeah. So it's not just building it, which is certainly a huge part of it.
Yeah.
Right? But you have to actually herd all of these cats to get the product built. So there is a certain amount of expertise. I mean, I think that's less. It's more, you know, compatible. You know, as a moat goes.
Yeah.
But certainly the technical expertise of actually designing the chips and so forth. Because I found it interesting when they listed, you know, their risks. One of the things that they talked about was their employees, right? Obviously, anybody who's spending this much on R&D is heavily dependent on knowledge, you know, of their workers, and then compensation of those workers so that they don't leave to go to other companies. Yeah. But you know, their competitors, or who they listed as competitors, included Tesla, Google, game companies like Activision, Blizzard. So, you know, they're competing in an industry in so many different ways, right? That they're designing these chips, but the people who are designing the chips also can design the chips for Tesla and other areas. So it's a fairly diverse market that used to be just focused on gaming. Yeah. Now all these other players, you know, are trying to get into the space. But it's clear that if they wanted to do that, they would have actually built their own GPUs, and they haven't, right? They've just said, well, NVIDIA's done a better job of that. So,
exactly.
So I think that, to me, is also a testament to how strong that moat is that if I wanted to go in and compete, there's certainly expertise on the Tesla side, but they're outsourcing the actual processing to, you know, NVIDIA.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. We didn't touch on this aspect of it, but I want to touch on the global presence of NVIDIA, right? In terms of chip making, I mean, NVIDIA is the king, would you say? I mean, in terms of GPU, I mean, there's no other, there are, but...
ATI is certainly competing there, but they don't, you know, ATI is owned by AMD. And the interesting thing about it is AMD is just doesn't generate a lot of money, you know? Like, when you look at how NVIDIA is crushing it in the marketplace and generates a lot of free cash, AMD just hasn't been able to translate it into... Now, they've got some very competitive things on the CPU side. GPU, you know, their Series 7 is not as exciting, I think, as the real-time ray tracing, to me at least. So...
It's definitely a premium product here, NVIDIA versus AMD.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a case to be made in the middle tiers, you know, where pricing, you know, really affects what the decision making is. And, you know, there was, for a time, cryptocurrency was a really hot thing. And then the last, you know, 3 months, they've actually had, or 6 months, they've had a huge decline in the number of cards being bought for cryptocurrency, which had distorted the market really for, you know, what their core product was. So I don't know if cryptocurrency mining is going to come back, you know, if people are going to be buying those chips. And that's why we saw a huge decline in NVIDIA's prices. Effectively, people were saying that there's an endless supply for their cards. They were so in demand that they were charging double the retail price to buy them.
So NVIDIA, you know, in terms of global presence, they're out there. Again, I wanted to mention this statistics. About 40%, and Hari mentioned retaining talent, right? Retaining talent. About 40% of our employees are located outside the U.S., you know, as of 2018, January 28th, 2018. So, again, kind of going back to operational efficiency as one of their moats, a weak one, certainly a breachable one, but certainly a noticeable one. Operational efficiency, being able to conduct this fabulous fabrication process, all, you know, outside of their you know, they don't have a manufacturing plant, all outsourced. That's certainly a noticeable one, but also global presence, maintaining that presence, employee presence all around the world to do all of their R&D stuff. Here in the U.S., they're located in San Jose area. Let's move on to the next question.
Yeah. So what is the company's long-term prospects and runway for growth?
Yeah. I want to talk, before we go into that, I want to talk about kind of different market that they're playing in. We talked about this earlier on, but I want to kind of enumerate them. One is gaming. 2 is professional visualization. This is, you know, making animations and things like that. 3 is data center, and 4 is automotive.
Yep.
And these are the verticals that they report in their annual report in terms of their revenue and things. So if you look, I thought this was pretty interesting. if you look at going back to 2015, and if you compare that number to 2018, this is not speaking of the entire market, but for Nvidia itself, gaming, their revenue increased from $2 billion to $5.5 billion from 2015 to 2018. Professional visualization, $795 million to $932 million, not as robust as gaming growth. Data center, look at this, $317 million to 2018, $9.2 billion. So there's quite a bit of jump there.
1.9 billion.
Or what did I say?
9.2.
Oh, sorry. 1.9 billion.
Yeah, no, 317 to 9.2 would have been a lot.
That would have been a lot.
But to 1.9 is still
it's quite
tremendous.
A bit of jump.
And it's still growing.
Yeah, growing crazy. And then the fourth one, automotive, 183 million in 2015 to 2018, 558 million. Certainly it's a lot of growth there too, but not as robust as data centers. But these are some of the numbers that I want to share with you guys to illustrate that, at least in NVIDIA's realm, these verticals they're growing absolutely.
Yeah, and I think also one thing to say in that growth is, people who are buying PCs and stuff like that in the gaming side.
Yeah.
There was a lot of cryptocurrency cards that were purchased, and the high-end cryptocurrency cards were the ones that were being purchased because they were the most efficient at mining crypto. But the other thing that was interesting about that was early on GPUs, people were buying the value line. They were the GPU was under $250 to $300 was where people were buying. Now people are the price point has gone up to the premium cards of $800 for up to $1,100, and there's still a lot of demand at that high end on the gaming side, because if you're really into gaming, that's where you see a lot of big bang for your buck visually. So you're seeing that expansion. When we talk about that runway for growth, I think they can improve their gross margin as they've done over time by people are buying higher end products. That's an area of growth just inside their gaming thing. But I think it's in the not too distant future, data center is going to be a bigger, could be a bigger play for them.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that actually. I mean, data center, we've gotten from 300 million to 1.9 billion dollars, and data centers, when they're building out new data centers, they want the highest quality chips to be able to render all these different things and have all these computational powers to do all these parallel processing. So, and I agree. I mean, and also these are for data centers, these are enterprise level sales.
Yeah.
So it's going to be big sales.
They actually mentioned in the Q3 conference call, Google just bought one of their newest chips.
Yeah.
And installed it in the data center, and it was the time from, design or build to the time it was actually installed was like some insanely low, like 30 days or something like that.
Wow.
So there's a lot of adoption already for these newer lines because there's so much demand for the cloud AI computing stuff. So,
yeah, that's interesting.
All right. So I think we've talked a little bit about these next two questions. So we'll just briefly touch on them. Does the company require a lot of capital reinvestment to maintain its business? So obviously they're putting in 25% of their R&D, of their revenue is R&D.
Yeah.
So, yes, I mean, they want to, in order to remain competitive in any tech firm, you have to, continuously reinvest in, in technology. And I don't see that, changing, but they're able to, actually leverage it for, high rates of return. So it seems to be working for them.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a price you pay to compete at this level.
Yeah.
You have to continuously invest to be at the top, or else, AMD might, for example, catch up and other companies might catch up. So it's a price you pay.
Right.
And especially in the tech company, in the tech realm, you have to invest.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. And then the next question is, do they have favorable relationships with various parties? So, I think we actually also have talked a little bit about this, too.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about how complex the supply chain is for them. because they're building out, it's a fabless system, which allows them to maintain higher margins.
Yeah.
But then they have to rely on third parties, manufacturing everything.
Yeah.
So there's certainly some risk there if.
Yeah, I think I think it's a risk, but for the past 3 companies that we've analyzed, 2 companies we analyzed, we analyzed Skechers and we analyzed Canada Goose. If I reflect back on those also had some component of outsourced manufacturing.
Yeah.
And in those outsourced manufacturing capabilities, they mentioned that when you are dependent on suppliers to give you all the raw goods, for example, they're not going into contractual obligation with these suppliers. And I think that statement right there applies here also.
Right.
They stay in the 10K. All the subcontractors and the suppliers and all these like intricate layers of manufacturing, contractual obligation is not really present.
Yeah.
So I think that's a risk.
Yeah. No, I mean, obviously they've figured it out.
Yeah.
So I don't know that how easy it would be to disrupt that, because obviously it's a two-way street. Those manufacturers are also heavily dependent on Nvidia.
Yeah.
If they were to move their business somewhere else, it could be devastating. So they want to maintain good relationships on both sides, I think. Certainly Nvidia is constantly putting out new chips, and that there's demand, for those. And now as the data center market grows, they're going to have to start, adding capacity to get, those complex chips built too. So, so yeah, I mean, it's certainly a problem. And, but again, with all of these things, you have to look at it on a larger perspective. They're not going to screw themselves over. Neither are the suppliers. But in the event of a natural disaster in Southeast Asia, which happened to the hard drive market a few years ago, or some other events like that, trade war, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There are certain risks that you'd have to be concerned about. But over the long term, I don't see that being really a problem.
Yeah.
There may be some hiccups here and there, like the cryptocurrency, thing, has died out. But I don't see any that changing the long-term prospects for Nvidia. People want gaming chips, to get the latest and greatest graphics. They're going to have to use Nvidia, or to a lesser level, AMD. So,
yeah, I agree with that. Should we move on to the next question, or let's see?
Yeah. So actually, the next question we will save for the next podcast, which will be talking about the financials and the return on capital. So,
that sounds good. Let's close out this podcast then. This was episode 39. We're going on to 4th decade of the podcast. So stay tuned, guys. Thank you all for listening to this episode.
And we'll if you have any questions or any other things that you want to drop us a line, tell us about your experience with Nvidia or anything else, send us an email at info@valueinvestor.org. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.